Hi, this is Dave from Priority Bicycles. Today we're going to assemble your new Continuum Onyx. Now, before we get started, it's important to know that we always recommend that you either have a professional bicycle mechanic assemble the bike, or if you choose home assembly, to make sure and have a professional bicycle mechanic safety check the bike. To start, you're going to need a household screwdriver and a set of diagonal cutters or scissors. Let's open the box, unwrap the bicycle, and lay out all the components. Once you've removed the bike from the box and removed all the protective packaging, let's remove everything from inside your accessories box. Inside your accessories box, you'll find the front brake rotor with bolts, your instruction manuals. Now's a great time to stop and read through these completely before proceeding. A fender bolt, a red rear reflector, a white front reflector, pedals, seat post, and seat. The seat may be loose in the box. In terms of wrenches, you have a 15mm and a 10mm open and closed end. For Allen wrenches, you'll have a 6, 5, 4, 3mm Allen, a Torx wrench, and an 8mm open end. The 3mm Allen and the 8mm open end are for adjusting your light if needed. Now, let's start by assembling the front brake rotor onto the front wheel. To assemble your brake rotor onto your front wheel, start with this star pattern facing upward. Then, remove the brake rotor and the 6 bolts from the packaging. When you look at your brake rotor, one side will say Tektro with arrows, the other side will not. Make sure the words Tektro are facing up and place the rotor right onto the front wheel. Then, get your 6 bolts. Using the supplied Torx wrench, install the bolts loosely all the way around. Once all 6 bolts are installed loosely, start applying tension and work in a star-like pattern. Keep repeating until all bolts are tight. Working in a star-like pattern, tighten each bolt until the wrench leaves an indentation in the palm of your hands.
If you have a large or 21-inch Continuum, then the bike will ship with the brake off and the fork backwards. So as part of the assembly, you want to make sure that you rotate the fork 180 degrees so that it's facing forwards. If you're not sure whether you have a large or 21-inch bike, you just want to be absolutely certain that these mounts for the brake caliper are on the left or the non-drive side of the bike. Okay, so now let's install the front brake caliper. So there's a few bolts that shipped in your parts box for this, and go ahead and grab your 5mm Allen key. There's a clip for the brake line, and you might find it here hanging on the line, or you might find it on the brake line tab already. So just go ahead and set that aside for a moment. So go ahead and grab that caliper and just route it here on the outside of all the lines in front of the bike. And just start threading in the mounting bolts for it. So you don't want to make these completely tight just yet, just tight enough to hold it onto the mount. If you need to get better access, you can tilt the frame out of the way or flip it upside down. Okay, so you want to just tighten them down enough so that there's still play in the caliper, but it's only maybe half a turn or less until it's tight, because that's going to be important for getting that centered when we install the wheel. Okay, so now clip the brake line in place. I prefer to use a zip tie to hold the brake line in place. Thank you. Now let's install the wheel. So grab your 15mm wrench and just take the fork spacer out. And take the brake pad spacer out if you haven't already. If your bike shipped with X-locks, make sure you grab the tool from the parts kit and you can identify which of the axle nuts requires the X-lock. It's this kind of dome shaped one with little tabs on it. So it should be hand tight, but if it's not, you can throw the tool on there and just loosen it like so. Make sure these are backed out enough so that it'll clear the dropouts on the fork. If your bike doesn't have X-locks, just use a 15mm wrench. So go ahead and loosen both axle nuts enough. And so we want to make sure that the disc brake rotor is on the same side as the disc brake caliper, and that the plug for the dynamo is facing up and is on the same side as the dynamo wire. So just pick up the front end of the bike, and you want to keep an eye on that disc brake rotor because it's going to go right in between the middle of the caliper, and then aim the axle right into the dropouts. So you want to keep an eye on your dynamo tab here as well. So let's just pop the kickstand down and we'll take a look at this. So this piece is called the cannon plug, or the Lego piece, and you want to make sure that these wires are hooked around onto the outside of the channels here. Then you can go ahead and plug it in.
You give like the red wire should be on the outside.
It doesn't actually matter.
Okay. Doesn't
Yeah,
matter.
that's a good point though, but it doesn't matter. So now just go ahead and start tightening down your axle nuts. You can just snug them up by hand to start. So now I'm just going to do each side a little bit at a time to stop the hub from rotating. On this side, if you have the X-lock, you want to go ahead and grab the tool and just hold it in place while you use your 15mm wrench on top of it. Then you can go ahead and tighten that down hard enough so that the tool makes an imprint in the palm of your hand. Then just go back and double check that the other side is also nice and tight so that the tool leaves an imprint in the palm of your hand. Now let's center your brake caliper. Make sure your caliper still has a little bit of play in it. Then go ahead and squeeze your front brake. So that should kind of hold the caliper in place. So then I like to start with the lower mount. Just give it a somewhat gentle turn to snug it up. Then go to the upper bolt, tighten that, and then go ahead and snug those up nice and firm. And then double check. You just give a look down from the top. You can look at the relationship between the rotor and the brake pads, and it should be in between them with a little daylight in between. If you don't quite get this on the first try, you can go ahead and just loosen up. I like to do one mount at a time, and if you look down straight from the top at the relationship between the rotor and the pads, you can move the caliper very slightly until you see daylight on both sides, and then you shouldn't get any rubbing.
Now we're going to move on to the front fender. You'll need the nut, bolt, and washers that came in the accessories box, 4 and 5mm Allen wrenches, and a 10mm open-end wrench. Remove the nut and bolt from the packaging. Remove the rear nut and the metal washer. Keeping just the bolt and single washer, thread that through the front of the fork. Then slide your fender making sure that both struts go around the tire, and thread it right onto the bolt. Add the additional washer and the nut. Once on loosely, we're going to install the struts, and then we'll come back to tightening this. On each side, use your 4mm Allen wrench to remove the bolt and washer. On each side, take the bolt and washer, put it through the fender strut, and install tight. Repeat on the other side. Again, it's bolt, washer, and then fender strut. Once both fender struts are installed, get your 5mm Allen and your 10mm closed end wrench. And with one hand, push up on the fender.
Can you turn the front wheel? Yep.
While pushing up on the fender, grab the nut with your 10mm closed end wrench and tighten the Allen bolt. As it begins to get tight, make sure you're holding your fender up towards the top of the fork and that the fender's straight. With your fender properly installed, let's move on to the seat post. For this, you'll need the 5mm Allen wrench. Notice the minimum insertion mark. You never want to be able to see the minimum insertion mark because it should be all the way in the frame. With the minimum insertion mark pointing to the rear, install your seat post. You may need to loosen, with the 5mm Allen wrench, the seat clamp first. Installing at least past the minimum insertion mark, tighten. You can come back and adjust to the proper seat height later.
If you have the X-lock like this, go ahead and have your tool at the ready. Make sure that the lock itself on the seat post clamp is loose enough that you can move it with your hand. Go ahead and slide the seat post in. Start by making the nut hand tight. You can see I'm kind of holding the seat post at a particular height right now just so it doesn't slide in. You can fit the adapter on there and just hold it in place. And just go ahead and use your 15mm wrench to tighten that down.
Once tight, loosen the two bolts holding the clamp. Once loosened, that you can pick this up the width of the seat rails, go ahead and install the seat. Put one side in first, then the other, and clamp it between the two rail guides. Make sure to stay between the minimum and maximum markings on the seat. For now, I'm going to install my seat pretty level. You can come back and adjust this later. Tighten both bolts on the seat head clamp equally, alternating between the two. With the seat tightened, let's move on to the rear fender. Installing the rear fender is similar to the front. Remove each bolt and washer. Remember to keep the washer next to the bolt head, thread it through the fender strut, and install it in the forwardmost position on the dropout. Repeat on the other side. Now let's move on to the pedals. You'll need the big 15mm wrench again. This time we're going to use the open end. To install your left pedal, this is going to install counterclockwise or reverse threaded. Start with the left pedal that has the L sticker, and on the axle you'll see it says CR-L. If you have a dab of grease, put it on the threads before installing on both pedals. Now install the pedal turning counterclockwise. You can do a little bit by hand before moving to the wrench. It's really important with both pedals to get them really tight on the crank arm. So once you have it slightly tightened, you'll want to use significant force to really tighten this down. The wrench should leave an indentation in the palm of your hand. To install your right pedal, it should have an R sticker on it, and stamped on the axle you should see the CR-R. The R is for the right or drive side of the bike. The right pedal is standard threading, so you'll thread in the axle clockwise. You can start by threading it in with your hand. However, you'll want to complete it with the wrench. It's very important with both pedals to get them really tight. So once you have it slightly tightened, you'll want to get the wrench and put a lot of torque on pushing it forward or clockwise. You should tighten this enough that the wrench leaves a good indentation in the palm of your hand. Now let's move on to the front reflector. Remove the front reflector, which is the white one, from its bag. You'll need a household Phillips screwdriver to install it. If your reflector came with a shim, hold the shim inside the reflector with the ribs pointing out. Remove the Phillips screw. With the screw head on top, open up the clamp and clamp it onto the thick part of the handlebar, opposite your light. Perpendicular to the ground, tighten. The rear reflector installs the same way, on the seat post. Remove the Phillips screw then open up the clamp and slide it around the seat post as such. The basic part of your assembly is now complete. Let's check to make sure that your headset's tight. You can grab your front brake and rock the bike back and forth. If you feel any play, your headset's a little loose. To tighten it, you'll loosen both pinch bolts and slightly tighten the top cap. Again, only finger tight. Then, make sure your stem's perfectly aligned straight and retighten both stem pinch bolts. Check that your handlebar's tight. Check that your light is unobstructed by your cables. Check that your brakes, both front and rear, are not rubbing. If they are rubbing, we have an additional video on how to help reset your brakes. Check that your fenders are not rubbing your tires. Check all the bolts on the bicycle, bolts we touched today and the bolts we didn't touch today, to make sure they're tight. If you'd like to adjust your saddle, you can loosen both pinch bolts. Then you can tilt the saddle so the nose or tail goes up or down, and you can slide it back and forth within the minimum and maximum lines. To test your front light, lift up the front end of the bike and spin the wheel really fast. If the light does not come on, you may need to toggle the on-off button on the back of the light. If you keep having problems, you should check the connections down at the dynamo or send us an email. You can adjust the positioning of your light using a 3mm Allen wrench, and your light comes with a USB port. The micro USB port is handy to recharge a rechargeable battery or other small electronic item. We don't recommend you charge a phone with it because of the starts and stops of riding and the different variations in power output. The recharging feature only works when your light is in the off position. Please note the capacitor in the light maintains a charge as a safety feature. This means after a couple minutes of riding, when you're at a stoplight or stop sign, the rear light will stay blinking up to about 5 minutes, and your front light will dim from 3 LEDs down to a single LED to help alert oncoming traffic of your bicycle. Anytime you stop riding, your lights will stay on for several minutes while the capacitor drains in this important safety feature. Before riding, we recommend that you have a local bicycle shop safety check the bicycle to make sure it's fit for the road. We hope you love your new Priority Continuum as much as we do. If you have any questions about your bicycle, our contact information is on the screen. We'd love to hear from you.